Welcome to the Explainer. All right, let's just jump right into this. Today, we're unpacking what is basically a biological detective story. It's all about this massive, frankly understandable frustration for so many people over the age of 60. You know the drill. You're doing the hard part. You're fasting for 16 hours, drinking nothing but black coffee, being incredibly disciplined, and yet that tape measure around your middle absolutely refuses to budge. Waistbands just aren't shrinking. Well, today's explainer is going to show you exactly why that's happening. We're going to look at the hard biological data, and I'm going to walk you through a solution. Now, I have to warn you right up front, the solution is entirely unglamorous. It is honestly incredibly boring, but according to the clinical literature, it's highly, highly effective.
Just look at this single, staggering number right here, 65%. To figure out why your waistline isn't shrinking, we have to look back at a major 2020 trial out of UC San Francisco. They tested that incredibly popular 16-8 intermittent fasting protocol. And sure, the participants did lose a little weight. But here's the absolute bombshell. 65% of the weight they lost was actual lean muscle mass, not just fat. So it wasn't your effort lacking. The effort was just pointed at the wrong biological variable entirely.
So here's our agenda for today. 1. The 16-8 fasting failure. 2. The muscle warehouse metaphor. 3. The telephone game of internet advice. 4. The boring but bulletproof PR protocol. And 5. The daily protein mistake.
Okay, Section 1. The 16-8 fasting failure, or losing the wrong weight. The findings of that 2020 UCSF trial, which was published in JAMA Internal Medicine, are incredibly revealing. Researchers Dylan Lowe and Ethan Weiss took 116 adults and had them fast from noon to 8 p.m. for 12 weeks. At the end of the trial, the fasting group lost a pretty modest 1.7 kilograms. But let's slice up that weight loss. 65%, so about 1.1 kilograms, was lean muscle mass. Only 35% was fat mass and other tissue. Now, to put that into perspective, the normal proportion of lean mass you'd expect to lose during weight loss is somewhere around 20 to 30%. This trial completely blew past that. 2/3 of what those participants gave up was literally their most vital tissue.
In the medical world, this is called sarcopenic obesity. It's this dual physiological process where you're losing skeletal muscle mass while simultaneously gaining visceral fat right there in your trunk. Now let's do a quick clarification here, because the internet might try to sell you on achieving 0% visceral fat. Guys, that is a dangerous myth. Visceral fat is essential structural tissue. It cushions your kidneys, it holds your organs in place. If you had 0%, you'd literally be in an ICU. But when visceral fat levels get too high, and that runs concurrently with muscle loss, it creates a really dangerous metabolic loop. And the trickiest part, your bathroom scale completely hides this from you. Two people can weigh the exact same amount, but have wildly different levels of visceral fat. This is exactly why you need a tape measure, not a scale. The NIH actually warns that waist measurements over 40 inches for men and 35 inches for women carry some very real metabolic risks.
Moving on to Section 2, the muscle warehouse. Let's talk about where that glucose actually goes.
I want you to think of this logistics metaphor, which is based on decades of research by Ralph DeFranzo. Imagine your muscle is warehouse floor space. Your meals are the delivery trucks backing up to the loading dock. Insulin, that's your dock manager. And visceral fat is the overflow yard outside. When you eat, 70 to 80% of that glucose gets pulled right into your muscle tissue. So if you've got plenty of floor space, the dock manager, insulin, has a super easy job putting away those pallets. But if your muscle floor space shrinks, well, the same delivery trucks arrive, but there's just nowhere to put the cargo. The dock manager gets completely overworked, insulin levels stay chronically elevated, and all that surplus glucose just gets dumped straight into the abdominal overflow yard as visceral fat.
So the absolutely crucial point here is this well-documented baseline in the sarcopenia literature. Skeletal muscle mass naturally declines 3 to 8% every single decade after age 30, and that rate actually accelerates after age 60. Look, if you've been frustrated by this should validate exactly what you're experiencing. This muscle loss is happening naturally, it's shrinking your warehouse floor space, and it's driving that visceral fat loop without you doing a single thing wrong. It's biology. It's not a lack of discipline.
All right, Section 3. The telephone game. Time to bust some fasting myths.
It is honestly wild to see how a scientific sentence travels and mutates online. On side A, we've got the famous 2018 Elizabeth Sutton pilot study published in Cell Metabolism. It showed these great metabolic improvements without weight loss. But the actual study was conducted on just 8 men. Their meals were heavily supervised and perfectly portioned by researchers, and crucially, their 6-hour eating window ended before 3 p.m. Now look at side B, which is the mainstream internet advice you've probably been following. Unsupervised meals in your own kitchen with an eating window from noon to 8 p.m. Guys, they are practically on opposite ends of the clock. The internet just completely ignored human biology here. Your insulin sensitivity is at its highest in the morning and its absolute lowest at night. So a 6-hour window ending at 8 p.m. is cramming your food into the exact part of the day when your body handles glucose the worst.
And that leads us to the other massive pillar of the fasting trend, autophagy. The reality is, and I quote, autophagy is real, but there is no study establishing the exact hour at which it turns on in your body. The numbers you were given were manufactured. People on the internet love to claim autophagy magically peaks at hour 16 or 18, but remember Yoshinori Asumi's 2016 Nobel Prize for mapping autophagy? That was done in yeast. The follow-up research was in rodents, and their metabolisms run infinitely faster than ours. There is literally no human study giving us a neat little train timetable for when autophagy flips on. Chasing these made-up hour markers by extending your fast just pushes your body into net protein breakdown, meaning you are cannibalizing your own muscle. And if you happen to be on medications like sulfonylureas or insulin, stretching out these fasts actively spikes your risk of dangerous hypoglycemia.
Which brings us to Section 4, the PR protocol, your boring but bulletproof solution.
There are 3 steps to the PR protocol. P stands for protein floor, R is for resistance training, and E is for the envelope, meaning your eating window. These 3 unglamorous variables have to be present simultaneously if we're going to fix that metabolic loop.
To understand why the P is so critical, we need to talk about anabolic resistance. This is a physiological condition in older adults where your muscle requires a significantly larger dose of protein in a single sitting just to trigger the muscle-building response. Researcher Stuart Phillips actually showed that older muscle acts like a stubborn receiving dock. You need a much larger delivery truck to pull up just to convince the unloading crew to wake up and finally get to work.
The reality of this anabolic resistance is pretty stark. If you want to maximize muscle protein synthesis, a 22-year-old only needs about 20 grams of protein in one sitting. But look at the 70-year-old. That threshold doubles. It jumps to 40 grams. If a 70-year-old eats a 20-gram protein meal, the muscle's receiving dock logs the delivery, sure, but the unloading crew never mobilizes. The muscle-building signal just isn't triggered at all.
So here are your exact science-backed targets. First, your total daily protein floor should be 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. That's the bare minimum recommended by expert groups studying aging muscle. Second, your per-sitting protein has to be 30 to 40 grams at least twice a day, and it needs to include about 3 grams of the amino acid leucine to actually trigger that synthesis. Finally, resistance training. You need a minimum of 2 sessions per week of progressive load. And hey, before you think it's too late for you to start lifting, consider Maria Fiatrone-Singh's 1994 study in the New England Journal of Medicine. She proved that high-intensity resistance training built significant muscle size and strength in frail nursing home residents who had an average age of 90. It is never too late. And that brings us to the E in our protocol, the envelope. Your eating window should be 10 hours, and it needs to close by 7 p.m. A 2020 Salk Institute study showed that 10-hour windows work incredibly well for older populations on medications for metabolic syndrome. Closing that window by 7 p.m. perfectly aligns with your body's naturally declining insulin sensitivity in the evening. And this is vital. 14 hours is your fasting ceiling, not your floor. Going past 14 hours doesn't unlock some magic fat-burning mode. As we learned, it just cannibalizes your precious muscle tissue.
Section 5, the daily protein mistake. Because when it comes to this protocol, timing is everything.
Let's say your target is 100 grams of protein a day. You have 15 grams at noon, maybe 20 grams for a snack at 3 p.m., and then a big 65-gram steak at 6:30 p.m. Hey, you hit your 100 grams. Your nutrition tracking app gives you a big green check mark, but your biology, it sees a total failure. Why? Because of that anabolic resistance we talked about. Your older muscle needs 30 to 40 grams in a sitting just to turn the repair process on. At noon, you were below the threshold. At 3 p.m., still below it. You only actually crossed that anabolic threshold once that whole day at dinner. You completely missed crucial biological repair windows that your phone app just simply cannot see.
So I want you to ask yourself today, are you feeding your muscle or are you just watching the clock?
Now, remember, you should always consult your physician regarding any dietary changes, especially if you're on medications or managing kidney function. But for sure, it is time we start prioritizing our real muscle health over these arbitrary, internet-manufactured fasting trends. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next Explainer.